Mr. Liang Enghua.
Question 7, sir.
Mr. Speaker, pre-COVID, Singaporeans took about 8 million trips every day on public transport for work, for school, for social purposes. A reliable, convenient, and affordable public transport system is essential to ensuring connectivity in our densely populated city. It also boosts economic activity, reduces road congestion and emissions, and contributes to the sustainability and livability of our city. Over the last decade, we have steadily enhanced the public transport system with attendant increases in cost. Commuters have benefited from a 40% expansion of the rail network, 18 new bus services, reduced peak hour waiting times for basic bus services from 30 to 15 minutes, as well as significant improvements in rail reliability from 67,000 to over 1 million mean kilometers between failures. From 2012 to 2021, operating costs for public transport increased by 7% per year on average. This was not matched by revenue growth. Consequently, government subsidies have been increasing. The government currently subsidizes public transport services by more than $2 billion a year, or about $1 for every journey. In addition, we have committed over $60 billion to expand and renew the rail network over the next decade. As with other subsidized services, government has to consider how best to share the cost between users and current as well as future generations of taxpayers. There are three key aspects. First, government continues to fully fund the expansion of public transport infrastructure, as these are large, lumpy expenditures. Second, we must find ways to economize and get value for money. This requires a comprehensive approach, from efficient procurement by LTA and productivity-focused operations by public transport operators to optimizing the provision of bus and rail services, even as we grow the overall network to serve new residential areas. Ultimately, we have to deploy our finite resources in a manner that best serves all Singaporeans. And third, we have a fair formula to ensure that commuters pay a fair share of the costs by accounting for key cost drivers for public transport, in particular wages, energy, and inflation. The government is also mindful that we have to support those with greater needs and fewer means. We keep fares lower for concession groups such as seniors and students, and provide public transport vouchers to low-income families. We will continue to work with public transport operators to ensure judicious cost management. The fare formula is being reviewed to ensure robustness and relevance in light of changes in the industry and in commuting patterns. As we continue to expand the public transport network, and operating costs rise with inflation and other cost drivers, we will continue to seek an optimal balance between the fiscal sustainability of government spending on public transport and ensuring affordability of public transport fares, especially for the vulnerable segments of our society.
Mr. Liang Enghua.
Thank you, sir. So I thank the Minister and also commend the MOT and LTA for the significant build-up of public transport connectivity. It's indeed money well spent and value for money, I would say. The Minister mentioned about the fare review, the fare adjustment formula review upcoming. And of course, in every fare review, we wait with bated breath on the outcomes. So can I ask the Minister how he sees the fare adjustment formula being improved upon, and what can the public expect? And also, it would appear that under the current formula, the balancing item to square up the cost versus the revenue is the fare adjustments. So can I ask the Minister if this is indeed the case, and whether the PTOs as well as the subsidies from the government can also help to take a bigger share of any cost increases? My final point is whether can the public transport vouchers be also part of the household support or GST offset package? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his questions. First, I think just so that we are all having the same frame of reference, there is a fair review exercise. This is really the annual exercise conducted by the Public Transport Council to decide on whether there is a need for an increase in public transport fares, and if so, by how much, based on the current formula. And this should normally come out sometime in the fourth quarter. And separate to that is the fare formula review. In other words, the formula itself needs to be reconsidered, taking into account the changing commuting patterns, the cost drivers, and other factors, so that we can ensure that any fare formula we use in the next cycle is one that is robust and relevant to the circumstances within which our public transport system operates. So how will it be improved upon? And I think by that the member refers to the fare formula. Well, I think we ought to give the Public Transport Council the time to go through the process and come up with its recommendations. But I think we can also be quite clear that it's apparent that there are many factors that are at play at this point, not least of which are, for example, commuting patterns, which may have changed. In fact, we already see some changes because of work from home, etc. The energy costs, whether that's a pattern that we expect to sustain, inflationary pressures, etc. So we should allow the Public Transport Council the space and time to do a proper job and come back with its considered recommendation. But clearly, the intent is to ensure that whatever formula we use is one that is relevant and applicable given the circumstances within which we will find ourselves over the next 3-5 years. On the fare adjustments itself and government subsidies, well, in some ways it's an arithmetic. There's a cost of providing public transport. There is revenue that comes from the fares that commuters pay. And if the two do not meet, then somebody has to pick up the slack. And the slack in general has been picked up through government subsidies. And as I've said, today the government subsidy is of the order of magnitude of $2 billion a year, about $1 billion each for our train and for our bus services. And we will have to see how the formula works out, what the specific recommendations are going to be, and then we have to take stock from there. But the fundamental point, one that I made earlier in my response, but I wish to re-emphasize, is we do need to strike that balance between, on the one hand, having a public transport system that is reliable, efficient, accessible, and at the same time affordable. Because the reliability, efficiency, and availability of public transport does come at a cost, and the costs are increasing. So we need to decide how that cost burden is to be apportioned, not just between the commuters and taxpayers of this generation, but also the taxpayers of future generations, because liabilities that we take on today will also be imposed on future generations of taxpayers. So we have to keep that in mind in making the decision. Finally, the member's question on public transport vouchers to help mitigate the impact, in particular on vulnerable segments. This is something that we take very seriously. Members may recall that last year, when the fares were increased, we also announced about 600,000 public transport vouchers to be made available. That is about the third decile in terms of income earners. In other words, up to the 30th percentile of income earners. Or if you include those who have no income, then it's up to the 40th percentile or the fourth decile. So up to 40% of Singapore households would be able to benefit from those public transport vouchers. And we will make sure that we continue to address the needs of these vulnerable segments through an appropriate provision of such public transport vouchers.